Yeah, I mean, being alone and being isolated and sitting in the misery, that's what I did when I was getting high,
Right.
right? The opposite of addiction is connection,
Right. Yes.
right?
Yes.
So the last thing I need is to be separated and disconnected from people.
Welcome everyone to another episode on Coffee with Kuda. I am excited to have Kaylee back here with us for a second episode. Kaylee,
Hi.
great having you again.
It's good to be back. Thank you.
How you been?
Good, good. Just busy work,
Yeah.
life.
8 years clean?
Not quite. In a couple of weeks, I'll be
In a
8 years
couple of
clean.
weeks?
Yeah.
That's exciting. But what's interesting and what's important to know is what you said. You still face your own struggles while you are clean.
Absolutely, yeah.
When you were 2.5 years clean, someone passed away in your life.
My boyfriend, yeah.
He was a boyfriend.
Yeah.
Tell me more about him.
Yeah. When I was a couple of years clean, just over that, I met this wonderful man. His name was Angus, and he was a member of another 12-step fellowship, and he lived in Nanaimo. And he had 15 years sobriety, and he'd never relapsed. And he helped a lot of people. And we kind of just bonded over like talking recovery and spirituality and everything, right? And not very long into that relationship, he was in a accident where he was riding, him and his brother were out riding their motorcycles, and a car lost control and came across the highway, and he went right through it.
Wow.
Yeah.
That must have been difficult to take, because I know your addiction went down when your dad passed. So you told me that's when you realized this is how relapse happens.
Just the feeling of the loss without having anything to numb it, without any substances, was unbearable. And I remember going to his service, and that's actually, I started smoking again that day and I'm still smoking today, because I needed to use something and I didn't want to pick up dope, I had this kind of aha moment of like, this is how relapse happens, right? Is at some point there's a choice, right? And I could either choose to sit in these feelings and isolate and eventually let addiction take me out, right? Or I could go to my home group.
The importance of self-awareness and the importance of knowing when to seek help.
Being alone and being isolated and sitting in the misery, that's what I did when I was getting high, right? The opposite of addiction is connection.
Right, yes.
Right?
Yes.
So the last thing I need is to be separated and disconnected from people. I've had a couple of women in my life in recovery who have also lost partners since then. And I believe, what are our struggles for if not to help someone else, right?
Right.
And I was able to support a couple of other friends through the same loss of their partners who, they had partners who like overdosed and died and stuff, and they stayed clean. And
Wow,
yeah.
wow, yeah.
Yeah. But the only downside to staying clean and staying in recovery is loss. That's it. Because most of my friends, most of my closest friends are always going to be people that are doing the next right thing, that are working this program, right? And there's always going to be people that relapse. There's going to be days where they choose to pick up because the drug wins, and that means forever you're dealing with loss.
And I think you said just a couple of weeks ago you lost someone else.
Last week.
Last week.
Just last week, yeah. Yeah, a good friend of mine, yeah.
Overdose.
Yeah, was in a recovery house in Surrey and chose to leave and overdosed that night.
Wow.
Yeah. And then I shared a picture actually of him on social media because I realized when I looked at I remembered the last time I saw him, right? And so I looked at that picture, and I realized that there's a very small percentage of the people in that photo that are still clean right now.
Really?
Yeah. So it's sad, right?
Did you have people around you who were using that made you make it easier to start picking up substances?
Both my parents actually smoked when I was a kid, right?
Okay.
Like it was a smoking household when I grew up. And I remember stealing liquor from my mom's freezer when I was just in elementary, right? I was just a kid. I remember, liking the way the alcohol warmed my stomach, like things like that. I remember I used to roll her cigarettes for her, and then I would steal some because she'd be drinking with her friends, and I would take that as an opportunity to, I'd roll you 20, but you're only getting 5 of them because I put the other 15 in my lap, like that kind of thing. I started smoking cigarettes when I was 9, right? So, and that's also addiction, right? So, yeah. I believe that, and it's, nobody knows for sure the exact, equation that makes somebody an addict. I just know that once that switch is flipped, it's flipped, and I can't ever not be an addict, right? I can't ever use things successfully and manage my life, right? So, I know there's a predisposition, like a hereditary predisposition, because I find it unlikely that it's a coincidence that I had heard growing up that my dad used to be a cocaine and heroin addict, right? And I ended up becoming a cocaine and heroin addict, right? Like those are the things that I used every day, cocaine and heroin.
Yeah.
Even other people were like, "How did you find it?" I'm like, "I don't know, it just found me." But I just don't think it's a coincidence that I ended up being addicted to the exact same substances as my dad, right? Yeah.
And you said your dad did not die from overdose necessarily, but it was complications caused by addiction.
He went into the hospital with pancreatitis, which is essentially a drinker's disease. And he was supposed to be out at the end of the week, and it was made to be no big thing. And then his heart stopped the day before he was supposed to get out.
The day before he got out.
Yeah. I wasn't even going to go see him. And my sister, Kirsten, she said, let's go. She's like, let's go together. So she took me. So I was like, okay. And he was so drugged up on morphine that he wasn't himself. The next day, I got the phone call that his heart stopped. And that night, he'd called my stepmom like 15 times through the night saying that he needed to come home. He's like, I need to come home, right? And she's like, no, you're going to stay where you are. Like nobody, it's like he knew, but how could we know, right? Yeah.
I want to touch on the upbringing of a child, right? And now here we are. How do the parents support a child, even if there are symptoms and signs there that they may go this way, but how do we get the kid out of that path, right? But it sounds like your dad was having his own troubles, right? His own struggles, and your mom had her own struggles.
Yeah, and she was a single mom of 4 kids, right? So,
Exactly.
I mean, that can't be easy either. I would say that there's no right there's no definite answer to get your kid away from addiction, right?
Yes.
I believe that keeping your children sheltered and not educating them around it is not the way to go, though, right? Because the more I would be told not to do anything or not informed about things, the more I'd want to find out myself, right? And the more I'd want to rebel and do it. My nephew and my niece, I have 2 nieces and a nephew, but my one nephew and niece, they didn't want to be around me, and my sister wouldn't let me be around them when I was at my low of my addiction. And my nephew was afraid of me. He'd see me like when I'm talking to myself and when I thought, when I'm digging for bugs and stuff, and he was afraid to be around me. And to this day, I know that he smokes weed. I do know that. But I know that people have offered him plenty of other things that he said no to. And he tells me it's because he saw I saw what it did to my aunt.
He's educated a bit around it.
Yeah. And I told him, he said, you know what, Austin, it's great. Like if you can learn from someone else's mistakes, that takes a lot of wisdom. Because most of us can't do that. We have to make our own mistakes to learn, But if you can learn from someone else's, that's a very wise person, right?
I think another area that you spoke to me about was in regards to upbringing was the abuse from your father. How did that impact you, do you think?
Well, because I was stubborn, it made me more rebellious. But yeah, I was afraid of my dad when I was younger, right? I used to try not to visit him. My mom would make me go visit him, you know? I don't think that he had the patience and tolerance that it took to really have like a young girl who was so rebellious, you know?
Wow.
I know that my grandparents kicked him out at quite a young age, right? They were like stern parents too, you know? A beautiful thing though is like I think the first time that I realized that people can change is when I saw the change in my dad. Actually, after he passed, I asked my stepmom, I said, did he ever go to like 12-step meetings or something, you know? She's like, not that I'm aware of. I'm like, because I just knew the change I saw in him was what originally showed me that people can change, because it was like night and day. To the dad I never wanted to be around when I was younger, to the person that I had to grieve when I lost him, right?
He was able to change and be more open-hearted.
I remember when I first got clean, that was the things that I noticed was like that I learned from him. I was aware of like the kind of the tools I was taking into recovery from him, and it was that people can change, because I've seen it happen. Although I don't know what exactly created the change and what, but I know he changed drastically, and I watched it as it happened, right? And I was so grateful to have those later years with him before he passed, right? Because we had a very different relationship, and also when I lost him. Like you said before in the last interview, like normally that would make people question their faith. Me, I was coming from being very atheist, and it actually created faith in my life, because the person he had become once he changed, I was like, there's so much more to him than flesh and bone.
Yeah. You took ecstasy first at 13. That moment, do you remember it as, I can't wait to try something like this? In your mind, are you saying, now I have freedom, what is going on?
I just remember that after I first did it, and then it became like my weekend thing. I would do it like Friday night, Saturday, you know? I remember the obsession, right?
Okay.
Even though I couldn't identify it as being obsession at the time, I am able to identify that being in recovery now, because I'm very well of like obsession and compulsion, right? The obsession was very consuming, because I remember all week at school, all I would think about is I couldn't wait until the weekend so I could do drugs again and go out all night, you know?
But then you ended up finding yourself, I want to say, stuck in the situations. You're now hanging with drug dealers. You're now driving drug dealers. These experiences, you never thought they would come.
No. Like at one point I had insured a vehicle for these guys that all deal, which is so, I mean, it's so irresponsible to do, because obviously they don't want things in their name, because they're going to get probably pulled over because they have records. So, but now anything that happens to that vehicle is going to be tied to me somehow, right? I used to always like buy drugs of any kind and then flip them for more money to pay for my own habit, to people that didn't necessarily have any dealers that they knew. So I'd make them go through me and pay more, right? And say, oh, I paid way more than I did, you know? And, but aside from that, I also, when I was no longer able to maintain like a job because I was hearing voices and digging for bugs and all that stuff, I also started to drive for these other guys that were dealing. And I used to sell crack with them. And I remember we were in, this is still in Calgary, and we were in Forest Lawn. I was driving one of them around. It wasn't good for me to go alone because it's not safe. It wasn't good for him to go without me because he also used crack and he'd do a lot of the supply, right? So we kind of kept each other in check that way. And I remember we were in Forest Lawn, which is like, it's like the hood in Calgary. And we were selling to a lot of the working girls out there that were on the street. And a couple of them we had in the back of the car, and one of them put a knife to my throat. Was in like psychosis. And just like in that moment, it was just a very real, like, what have I gotten myself into, you know? And he calmed her, the guy that I was with, he calmed her down and got her to remove the knife. But I remember just having that against my throat in the seat and thinking, like, is this where it's gonna end, right?
Does that tell you to get out of this life, or does it just tell you to be smarter?
No, unfortunately, I'm much too stubborn to take red flags like that. No, it's just addiction had a strong hold on me at that point. So, Yeah.
You had one or two more stories to tell about being surrounded by drug dealers.
There was a couple bad decisions that there's lots of bad decisions I made while using, right?
Right.
One of them was I actually let one drug dealer move in with me because he needed somewhere to go. And I thought, then I won't have to try to wake him up when I'm dope sick because he'll live with me. I can, it won't be like I'm outside calling him out. I can just go, I know where he sleeps. He's in the same place as me, right? So that was one thing. The other was a different dealer that I met through him, who I started using with regularly, and it's one of those things where it's like at some point, if somebody's giving you free drugs all the time, they're going to have an expectation, right? And me being naive and just thinking that's how great I am, people just want to supply my habit. One night I was using with him, and I remember a point where I stood up and I realized that I had no control of my body, and I fell. I went to go to the washroom and I fell, and I smashed my face off the side of the bathtub and I actually broke my nose, and I actually had a concussion. But I didn't remember anything else from that night, and the drugs that I was using should not have had that effect on me, right? I came later to realize that he had given me G or date rape and had his way with me. And he told me about it, and him talking about, what he called us making love, but I knew I was nearly unconscious, right? I had no control over my body that night, I knew that. And when he talked about it, it flashed some kind of memories, because I did remember something about being on the couch, and then, so I was like, oh my God, this really happened. I'm like, you're serious, right? And it was a dangerous situation. It was a bad situation, right?
Right.
I felt very violated, obviously, but again, addiction had its grips on me, and I didn't, despite the fact that I wanted to obviously cut that person out of my life because I knew that he had raped me and drugged me, right? I also knew that when I had no money and no way to get dope and I was sick, that's the person that I could still go to.
Do you tell your parents?
No, I don't think I ever told. No.
So you don't really seek help?
No. I was justifying to myself why I still had to keep this person in my life. Right? The last thing I wanted to do that would be tell people who would then know I'm hanging out with this person after what he did, right? Because that would look very foolish. Yeah.
Plus that's a secret life you're trying to hide as well. Yeah. Okay.
I remember when I was 16 and I was hanging out with guys that were nearly 30s. A couple of them I think were in their 30s. And now today if I saw that, I would be like, what is wrong with you hanging out with a 16-year-old girl, right? But when I was 16, I thought it's because that's how cool I was that they wanted to hang out with me. I was very mature for my age that they wanted to hang out with me. And on my 16th birthday, I slept with somebody who was 27. And when I got to be in my 20s, I just, once you're on the other side of the age and you kind of look back, and I just realized how sick that was, that somebody was even taking me out, hanging out with me, and giving me booze at 16, let alone that I ended up sleeping with this guy on my 16th birthday who was 11 years older than me, who was an adult, and I was a child, really, right?
Wow. And these are situations that you don't understand the risk.
You don't even understand it when you're in it. It's one of those things you look back later and you realize, wow, I was so naive, right? Because even when it happens, I thought it was still my choosing, right? And I see this happen with young girls that are on the internet and talking to guys that are much older, and they think it's because they're special or because they're so mature for their age or so beautiful. But it's because they are easier to take advantage than somebody who's older and wiser. People have motives that you don't see when you're in it and you realize after, Yeah.
That was powerful, and I think even more than I expected to hear. And finding even more impactful than I thought.
I would like to also say about the person who did rape me
Correct, yes.
is something that I got to experience how to forgive, right? And forgiveness doesn't mean what you did is okay. It means I'm no longer willing to carry around pain as a result of your actions, right? And I saw him when I was about 5 months clean, when I had just gotten clean. I went back to Calgary. I was going to the Emerge where my sister works to see her, the same place I used to beg her to x-ray me for bugs, right? But I was coming there clean now. And I ran into the dealer who did that to me. And he had also sent me letters to my recovery house and stuff. I don't know exactly how I knew which house I was in, but he did. But we always sent them back, you know? And I knew if I had this person in my life, I would use. That was my backdoor to using, you know? That was like, I had this person who would give me drugs, right? So I saw him at the hospital, and he was there to see somebody who apparently also worked at the hospital. And he said that he was now in recovery. I don't know if that was true or not.
Of course, right.
Right? That's not for me to say, but I hope for his sake that it was, right? And he was telling me that he sent me letters, and I said, I know, right? And he's like, why didn't you get in touch with me? And I said, you know why, like, you know what you did to me. And he, when he said he's in recovery too, I said, well, you know, I like to believe that that people under the influence of substances do things that they wouldn't normally do. And I like to believe that that's not who you are, that that's something you did when you were using as well, right? And in that moment, I felt a weight lifted from me, because then I wasn't walking around with that, you know?
My gosh.
Yeah, it's like a moment where I also accepted, not that anyone should ever go through that or blame themselves, but I also accepted my own responsibility for putting myself in situations where I was vulnerable, right? Because that was my part as I continued to, and I went back after that too, right? And bought off him still, or used with him, or...
To be able to say, despite what you made me do, I'll still choose to forgive you, so that one day I may be able to reconnect properly with someone I love.
Yeah, and because carrying around that anger, like even thinking about it now, like it makes me upset. It's not okay, right?
Of course, yeah.
But I don't carry that weight of that resentment where I'm constantly despising this person for what they did,
Correct.
right? Because that only hurts me, right? They say in recovery, they say that resentment is like trying to kill somebody by drinking your own poison. Because they have no idea that you're trying to kill them, but you're the one drinking it, right? So it's like they're going about their life, you know, none the wiser, and you're suffering the whole time. So I forgave him for me.
Wow.
Yeah.
That touched up on life as an individual who is stuck in the streets. And I'm calling it the streets because it's not home, right?
Yeah.
So I don't want to call it anything else, but... And you end up getting or facing situations like this that you're completely out of control of.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
And you have really no one to run to.
No. I already separated myself from everybody.
You've already
right?
separated.
Everybody that was safe, right? Yeah.
Yes. You're hanging out with very dangerous people who may actually take your life away for wanting to be away from them. How do you take this path to say, yes, being clean is important because you're now listening to your loved ones and not the streets? Yeah, talk us through that journey.
At the very end of it, I wasn't even able to to drive them and you know, do that for work. Like I was talking to the voices in my head, digging for bugs. Like I couldn't hold a job even if it was criminal. Like I couldn't, you know?
Okay.
I was completely, really isolated at that point, right? But it was my family surrounding me and me getting help. You know, so it was, I was so tired of being miserable. I was terrified. I knew terror every day because I could always hear people out to get me, and I was feeling bugs crawling in my head, and you know, it wasn't pleasant. It was, you know, by any means, it was misery. I didn't know that there was a way out, but I knew that I couldn't go on living the way I was living. It wasn't living, and I used to just hope that I wouldn't wake up if I went to sleep, you know. So when my family had intervention, I didn't know there was help left, and I just said, okay. They didn't get to read me no letters about like why I should get help or anything like that, right? I just said, where am I going? Because I was done. I was so spent. I couldn't struggle anymore. I was out of energy. I couldn't do it.
You spoke to me about the experience of having now to pay for treatment centers.
Yeah, so the only reason I got into treatment so quickly, and I didn't have to sit through the process of like being on a waiting list and calling every day to check in, because that's what they expect you to do, which, I mean, yes, they need to know that you're serious and that you're willing to do whatever it takes, right? The thing is when you're in addiction, you have no, I mean, for most people, they don't know what day it is. They have no concept of time. That's what I was like. I had no idea. I could get dressed in the morning, and now it's nighttime, and I'm still sitting in the same place doing one more. I haven't actually left the house with the list of things that I plan to do, right? So that was the story of my life every day. Luckily, my mom and my sister, Kirsten, they pitched for my treatment center, and that got me in right away. Otherwise, I would have been one of those people having to call and sit on a waiting list, right? And I wouldn't have been able to go to another province because if I was waiting for a government-funded bed, you have to be in the province that you're in.
That's correct.
Yes, yeah.
So you going into a treatment center, you are withdrawing from opiates. You're also trying to be clean from crystal meth. From a personal experience, which one is the easiest one to battle?
That's a tricky question because that would it insinuates that one addiction is worse than the other, and the most physically painful thing to come off of is absolutely opiates. There's no pain like it. It's excruciating. People shit themselves, vomit. You're drenched in your own sweat. It's like you're so soaked that it's like you're sitting in a tub of water, right? You could just wring it out. You have no energy to even move, but you're so weak and frail that you can barely stand up. But you also can't sleep through it because you're anxious and you just sit there and you just shake. You can't be still, you know? And every muscle that you've never even felt before is aching, right? And every day is worse than the day before for a while, right? Especially the first 3 days.
Were you on methadone or?
No, methadone doesn't do anything to me.
Really?
No, I used to go with friends who get carries from the pharmacy, and I would go with them and they'd give me some. I'd buy them off them, right? And I would be dope sick the entire time because I actually took them abroad with me when I traveled to Hawaii once. And because I didn't have drugs. So I snuck methadone with me, right? And I know it was the real thing because I went to the pharmacy with him, right?
Yeah.
I was sick the entire time I was in Hawaii with my boyfriend and his family.
So it didn't help?
No, it was awful. And that's when I'm trying to hide my addiction from my boyfriend and his family, right? And I had to pretend like I ate something bad overseas, right? Because I'm literally running to every washroom. It was miserable. It was an awful vacation. It was beautiful beach weather, and I was just freezing and sweating. Like, yeah. I did use Suboxone.
You did use Suboxone,
yeah.
and that one worked for you?
Yes. So I went on a 12-day taper.
Okay.
And that was just enough to get me so that I wasn't bedridden. A lot of people have really bad experiences with Suboxone. Some people, it puts them right into precipitated withdrawal. They get sick. For me, I was already dope sick when they gave it to me. And it was enough that I wasn't bedridden for that 2 weeks, you know?
Unfortunately, sometimes you do go through the pain because it is trial and error. Right? So,
Yes. Another thing is, like, around recovery, there's a lot of people who are clean, like how I am today, right? That shame people who are on replacement therapy, right? Using opiate replacement, saying they're not really clean, you know? And I think that's really, I think anything we can do that separates us and shames us is not the way to go, right? So, I mean, if somebody ends up being on opiate replacement until they decide they're ready to be completely off everything, then I think that's their business, you know? I think whatever, the idea about harm reduction, people think it's preached like it's a solution, and it's not, right? The solution is abstinence. But until you get to the place where you've reached your bottom and you're willing to try to become abstinent, right? It doesn't mean you should just have shitty street drugs and die, right? So harm reduction is intended to stop the spread of disease and to stop the deaths related to overdose, right? Until somebody hopefully then maybe wants to change their life one day, right? And then is ready to put in the work, right? So I think it's an important piece. Like, I believe in harm reduction because it saves lives, right? Not because it's a solution to addiction, but because it saves people's lives until they want something else.
There you go.
Yeah.
You took an answer to a question I had not asked.
That's how good I am in your head. Yeah.
I was trying to figure out your thoughts and your advice to people regarding harm reduction, right? Because I know that's the field you work in.
Yes.
So I wanted to know what you could tell us.
Yes.
So I definitely appreciate that.
I have friends in Narcotics Anonymous that when they were using, if they didn't have those little vials of water that we hand out, like, they would just use the rainwater sitting on top of dumpsters. So I mean, it's like harm reduction is so important, right? It really is.
You are now in your 8th year
Yes.
to sobriety.
Yes.
What does the future of Kaylee look like?
Oh, wow. Why do you always got to end with a question that I can't answer? Right? Last time it was, tell us something nobody else knows. I'm like, there's nothing nobody knows. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know what it looks like. I know that I want to do something that helps people, that's where my heart's at today. And I know I want to continue on my own recovery journey, right? And I want to see other people get there too. Every year that I stay clean, I grow. You know, I remember for the first 5 years, every time I thought, wow, I was really crazy last year. And then I'd get another year clean, I'd be like, wow, I was still really crazy last year.
Right,
you know? And now I'm like, it's part of my charm, you know? So I mean, you never know what to expect with each year. But I know I've gotten through some tough losses, some tough depressions, where feelings, you know, sucked, but they didn't kill me. And I look forward to finding out what I'll learn in years to come and what occupation and what field that might take me into.
Before I forget, actually, I know we spoke earlier about you were in the bars. You used to work in these bars, right?
Yes.
Yeah. You spoke about the G drug, which I feel like it's imperative to just touch on one more time, right? Because it's an unfortunate situation most people will find, unfortunately women, right? Yeah. But what you said something earlier about what you used to see.
So I know there's so many women out there that are preyed upon, that are in a vulnerable state when even if they're not an addict, they go out drinking at the nightclub and then they're more vulnerable and they get taken advantage of, or somebody puts the G, date rape, in their drink, right? And then, you know, just takes advantage of them. And there was times when I was bartending, I mean, every night I would see people, because you see people as they peter in, and if they're hanging out with their girlfriends or if they're with a guy. And so you know that this guy and this girl came in separately. But you see them leave and him be walking all right and her need his support, you know. And I mean, when they're leaving the front door, like the bouncers, it just looks like they're a couple as they're putting them in cabs, you know. But I'm like, it always concerned me because you assume that person's leaving willingly, right? And they'll even be probably conscious enough to say, nah, like I'm going with him, right?
Of course.
But I know that there's probably times I'm seeing people leave that they're really are not aware of what's going on and they're being taken advantage of, or they've been drugged, or they've been, you know, overserved to the point where this person's bought them drinks and is now taking them in a cab and doesn't know their name. You know, like who knows? Like, it's so dangerous. Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I think it was important to just bring it to light, right? Because the reason why we do this is for the youth.
Yes.
Right? I know there's everyone who benefits from it, but we hope that the youth are protected.
And I actually, because I work with youth and adults, there's been times when I'm leaving I'm working with the adults in Surrey, and I'm leaving there to go work at Double and go work with the youth downtown. Okay. And I've made jokes like that with the clients that I know I can joke with, right? And I'll be like, hey, I'm going to go, you know, work with the kids now and try to stop them from becoming you know? And they always laugh, like we always, you know. But it's like there's a seriousness to it as well.
Absolutely.
Right? Yeah.
And I know they're probably thinking, I wish someone would have helped us when we were young. We would have been. And
some of them, like many, have told me, like when I'm at work and stuff, that they never had youth programs and drop-in centers and people helping them when they were, you know. And I think there wasn't a lot of that around, and the awareness. And then, of course, it wasn't okay to talk about or whatever. Like, things were different, right?
Right.
So, yeah. So I'm glad that we have programs for the youth and for adults today,
Yeah.
right? Yeah.
Well, I hope our youth are listening as well, because we want to make sure that we prevent certain situations, right? We may not be able to be home to say, do this, do that, but even if your parents are using substances and it's a dysfunctional family, us as youth leaders, we want to be able to say, try not to go down this road.
Yeah. Try and learn from someone else's. Like, do they look like they're enjoying life? I bet you that they're not.
Exactly, yeah. And if you're going clubbing, well, you know what? According to Kaylee, while working in the bar, she saw A, B, C, D. So we're not saying do go clubbing, but if you do go clubbing, right, be careful to
do it safely.
To do it safely, exactly, yeah. I appreciate absolutely everything that you have taught us, you have shared with us, and I hope we can, without COVID, of course, right, to get you to come and speak to our youth group face to face.
Yes.
Right,
Yes.
to be more, just these life lessons. They don't even, it doesn't even mean that our youths won't be addicts. It just means our youths are now empowered to go teach others. So you know that it just continues to spiral. So
I've talked at schools a few times as a member of a 12-step recovery program, and also with Where Interventions. My friend runs a intervention company, right? And I've talked to, like, usually about 8th grade is usually where I've gone a couple of times.
Okay.
And I think once younger than that. And I mean, I tell them some stuff that scares them a bit, but that's not really the intent, because I know that's going to keep them from doing stuff, you know? But it's like to say what I went through and what the signs were, and so that they can identify when there is a problem, that there is a solution, that there is a way out, right?
Yes.
That it's not just like you're left to your own devices. And just kind of like how to maybe guide a friend that's struggling or to get out themselves, right?
More learning to go. I really hope everyone took something out of you, and I can't wait for whatever awaits for Kaylee.
Yes, me too.
And hopefully we can have you one more time to just tell us about what you are now up to in the future, right? Yeah.
Yes.
So can I just say thank you so much for coming
you.
again?
Thank
Good to see you.
Always a pleasure.
Cheers. Thank you. Hey everyone, thank you so much for making it to the end of the video. I do really appreciate it. If you can, please subscribe to our channel for more content. If you can, please join our Patreon team. The link is down below. And also you can join our GoFundMe. The link is also involved below. This will help us to bring awareness of addiction as well as destigmatize this illness. Your support is greatly appreciated, and we'll create more content for you. Thank you so much.